Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for Week 8. We're going to start at quarterback, where there are some players unranked, on bye, and injured. We know Burrow is out, Brock Purdy remains out, J.J. McCarthy didn't play, Kyler is on bye, but also out, and then Bryce Young is doubtful, and Jaden Daniels is also not going to play. He's been ruled out for Monday Night Football. There's also 6 teams on bye. Those players would include Jared Goff of the Lions, Matthew Stafford of the Rams, Sam Darnold of the Seahawks, Trevor Lawrence of the Jaguars, Jacoby Brissett of Arizona, and Geno Smith of Las Vegas. So none of those players are ranked. Let us move on to the matchups. This chart right here shows you every single defense ranked from best matchup to worst. And on the left, we have the most points allowed per game over the last 4 weeks in blue. In red, it shows you how many points they've given up per game on the season. So a little bit of recency bias. I kind of don't care as much about the first 3 games of the year. Those early weeks of September, now that we're in late October, I think are less relevant. So moving forward, I'll stick with just the last month of production, but I will still maintain the season-long data point that shows you how they're trending at the moment. Maybe we remember them as a great matchup. Perhaps lately, they've been more difficult. So let us take a look at this chart. And number 1 on it is unfortunately on bye. The Jaguars rank number 1, and perhaps Matthew Stafford's 5 touchdowns does kind of skew this data point, but they are unavailable. So technically the best matchup this week does go to Bo Nix, who faces off against Dallas. The Cowboys are giving up a lot of points everywhere, and it kind of doesn't matter who you are. You usually have a good game on the Cowboys. So Bo Nix, coming off an elite performance last week, should play well again. And then the third best matchup would be Cincinnati. The Bengals are pretty ass on defense. So Tyrod Taylor, I think, will get the start this week. It's still not a lock. He's actually questionable at the moment, but it seems like they're pivoting off of Justin Fields for the moment. So whoever the Jets starting quarterback is gets an upgrade. If it is Fields, we'd have an elite option this week. But sadly, with Taylor, I think it's just like a super flex option. He will rank top 20. If you get a top 3 matchup with 6 teams on bye, you're going to be a little more relevant. But with Tyrod Taylor, you got to be desperate to pick him up off the wire. Third best matchup available, Jalen Hurts going up against the Giants should have a good game. I think they'll bounce back after the loss 2 weeks ago. They did last week, and it looks like Hurts is much better at throwing the ball right now. So going to trust his rushing value. He's definitely a lock in the lineup this week. And at number 5, we do have the Colts, who did just give up 420 yards to Justin Herbert. So on the year, they are more difficult. I still don't think Cam Ward is going to be safe enough in your lineup, but technically on paper, he gets an upgrade. I don't think it matters. But next up would be Patrick Mahomes, who's been dominating and gets the Washington Commanders this week. That is the 6th best matchup. And I think Mahomes is a lock in the lineup. Then we have perhaps fool's gold. The Ravens rank next, and that's going up against Caleb Williams. So Caleb should have a good game here. If the Ravens defense remains dog shit, then he will play well. But I could see them really step up off the bye. Their season's on the line. I think this could be a bit of a trap. I think off the bye, sometimes teams make a big pivot, and they might look a lot different rest of season. But Caleb, on paper, should be a safe play. In my gut, though, I kind of don't trust him. And then at number 9, we have Pittsburgh, who has been a good matchup going against Jordan Love. I could see that game turn into a shootout because I'll skip the next matchup. The one right after that is Green Bay. The Packers are right there behind Pittsburgh, hovering around 18 points per game allowed per week. So I think Aaron Rodgers is going to play very, very well, and Jordan Love will go against him also in a solid matchup, play well. I think both Sunday night primetime quarterbacks are going to have some good stats here. I like this matchup for both of them on Sunday. So Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers get an upgrade. And then right between them would be Carolina as a top 10 matchup as well. And we're always starting Josh Allen. So that's recently a good spot for quarterbacks. On the year, though, they are much more difficult. 14.5 is ranking well in the bottom 10. However, in the last month, Carolina, not as scary. Then I think we're entering kind of a slightly neutral territory. Some of these matchups are still positive, but maybe not like big upgrades. The next 4 still allow more than 17 points, and that's kind of like the minimum you'll tolerate in your fantasy lineup. So Baker Mayfield against New Orleans stays neutral. So does Joe Flacco against the Jets, but lately they have been getting more difficult. Last 2 weeks, teams have only scored 13 points on them. The Jets defense actually is starting to wake up, but if Sauce Gardner doesn't play, then Flacco should be fine. Jaxson Dart on paper should be fine, but this Giants-Eagles rivalry will get interesting. I don't think the Eagles will roll over like they did last time. Lastly, in this neutral zone would be San Francisco. So CJ Stroud might have one of his better games of the season. He's had some rough spots, and without Nico Collins, it's probably not the safest bet, but the Niners defense is somewhat vulnerable to opposing quarterbacks. Then the next 8 teams are like firmly in the neutral zone, and these are a little bit more downgrades. You're not that happy if your quarterback just gives you 15, 16 points, like Kyler Murray has all year. So these next 8 teams, 4 of them are actually on bye, and I'm actually a bit more worried about the first 3. We have Tampa Bay going against Spencer Rattler in division. That's always a heated rivalry game. I could see a 10-9 final score, or at least less than 10 points for New Orleans. So not going to trust Spencer Rattler this week. And then the Titans also rank pretty neutral. Daniel Jones should be fine. But technically on the year, the Titans have been a bit tough, only giving up 15 points on average. But I still trust Daniel Jones. I think he's maintained must-start top 10 status. And then I did think Carson Wentz would have a decent top 20 performance, but he was dog shit. I didn't know he was that banged up going in to Sunday. So Chargers defense did play well, but then these next 5 matchups, most of them are irrelevant. 4 of them are on bye. We have Detroit, Las Vegas giving up about 15.5 points. They're both on bye. And then Arizona and the Rams are both allowing about 15 points per game on average themselves. So all 4 of those teams right in this number 19 to 23 ranking are on bye. There's one matchup, though, right in the middle, which is misleading. On the season, the Dolphins have been the second best quarterback matchup you could find. However, because of last week's bad weather game and then some other recent games that haven't been that terrible for them, they are much lower on the chart, and I actually don't think they're a bad matchup at all. So, in my opinion, Michael Penix actually gets a big upgrade. I'm actually focusing a bit more on the red stat for the Dolphins than the blue stat. The bad weather game was an outlier. So, in my opinion, as long as Michael Penix does play, he's questionable right now, I think he gets a considerable upgrade. The Falcons play much better at home, and I do like this spot for Penix as a superflex or streaming option as a flyer. So that's the last matchup I'm willing to consider somewhat fine, or at least positive. Moving forward, though, these last 10, I think, are terrible. Justin Herbert did buck the trend, though, against the Vikings. They had been a bad spot. He played pretty well. And then Dak Prescott gets Denver, possibly another MVP candidate, does just play well, and it doesn't matter. But in my opinion, the Broncos are a very difficult matchup here, so Dak does deserve a downgrade. And then Dylan Gabriel, no one was ever going to trust him, but against the Patriots, he should have a terrible, terrible game. So not starting Dylan Gabriel, that's for sure. And then Marcus Mariota offers some rushing value, a decent floor most of the time. But against the Chiefs, it's a bottom 5 matchup here, and I'm not willing to trust it. No thank you on Mariota against Kansas City. But then bottom 5, we have Chicago giving up 12.9 points per game in the last month. So perhaps Lamar Jackson does shit the bed, but on the season, Chicago's been a plus matchup, giving up over 17.6 points per game, and odds are Lamar still plays well. So I'm willing to dismiss this Bears downgrade, but if Lamar doesn't play well, then perhaps Chicago is actually that legit. They've played much better since the bye week. Then a major downgrade would be for Carolina, who face off against Buffalo this week, a bottom 5 matchup here. But Bryce Young is doubtful, not expected to play. Andy Dalton should get the start, and I'm not going to trust Andy Dalton. Buffalo has been much, much more difficult over their last 4 games, and off 2 losses, I'm not expecting that they roll over either. So not trusting Andy Dalton. And then the last 3 are really tough spots. Less than 13 points per game allowed, not just this week, but basically on the year. Cleveland has been a terrible spot all season, a bottom 3 matchup, regardless of whether it was last week in bad weather or any other game. So I'm actually giving Drake Maye a solid downgrade. He plays at home, so maybe it's irrelevant, but Cleveland on paper should be a rough spot here for Drake Maye. And then the last one on this chart is Atlanta, but they're not the toughest matchup. They rank bottom 2, and there's no way I'm trusting Tua Tagovailoa against the Falcons. 12 points per game on average this season. Tua will throw at least 1 or 2 interceptions. No fucking chance. I'm trusting Tua against the Falcons. And then if you notice, Houston is at the tail end of this chart, but their data point is actually not on the screen. I actually have to zoom out in order to show you how bad of a matchup the Texans rank. Now that I've dropped the bar to 4 points on the chart, we do see Houston finally shows up. Last 4 games, they're only allowing 5 points per game to opposing quarterbacks on the year, 8.9. If you're getting less than 10 points from the San Francisco quarterback this week, then Mac Jones is not a safe play whatsoever. I do not recommend Mac Jones. However, it is National Tight Ends Day, and if you told me George Kittle has 3 touchdowns, I kind of believe that might happen. So perhaps this is the week where some of these data points just get shattered and they don't fucking matter. But based on the chart, you should not trust Mac Jones whatsoever against the Texans. So those are the matchup stats for quarterbacks. Now let me show you my rankings. And I think with 6 teams on bye, there's some obvious and clear starters that have earned your trust so far. And I'm going to show you all of them right now. I think the top 13, 14 quarterbacks are really the only ones healthy and available this week that have earned some level of trust that should be started. So I think in the top tier, it's a no-brainer. We drafted them top 2. I will go back to the well on Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. Coming off the bye, I cannot see a reason to fade them whatsoever. Allen lost 2 in a row before the bye week. They have the Chiefs after this, so this is a clear get-right game. I expect them to blow out the Carolina Panthers. I also think Lamar Jackson, with his season on the line, will step up. So I think Lamar plays the best of anyone. We know that's his ceiling capability. Perhaps he is legitimately injured, and perhaps he doesn't run it very much. But I don't think they're going to lean on Derrick Henry. I think Lamar is going to be the heart of the offense as always, and I expect Lamar to bounce back to elite status. So I'm ranking those two 1 and 2 in an elite tier of their own. However, Patrick Mahomes has been the quarterback 1 on the year, so not going to fade him whatsoever. The Washington Commanders are a top 6 matchup this week, so definitely you can't bench him. And then based on where you drafted Jalen Hurts, there's no way you're benching him either. He gets a top 4 matchup against the Giants. So not too much to say on these top 4 guys. These guys are no-brainers at this point. No fucking chance you're going to bench him. And then moving forward, we're just sticking with my gut and avoiding some of the atrociously bad matchups. On paper, the Vikings were a downgrade, but I told you vehemently to start Justin Herbert. And I didn't expect that game from Oronde Gadsden, but I've seen Herbert play in person twice, and I'm not shocked he's playing at an MVP level. So with Joe Alt coming back, that was a smash. He'll be an automatic start rest of season. Bo Nix was the quarterback 1 last week, and he did it pretty much all in the 4th quarter. And this week he gets Dallas, which is the best matchup on the slate. With the Jags on bye, Dallas ranks 2 overall, but number 1 in week 8. So Bo Nix going to have a fantastic game. That's at least what we're expecting. And as long as he runs the ball, I think he'll be fine. But I could see this be an interesting J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey game. I doubt it craters Bo Nix, but he has been all over the place this year in fantasy. I could see him not live up to a top 10 game, despite being the QB1 with 40 plus last week. There has been some weird vibes regarding Bo Nix in fantasy. But at number 7, I think you've earned must-start status with Daniel Jones. The Colts offense is probably the best in the league. Historically, they're even better than the 07 Patriots right now. So I'm not going to bet against the Colts offense. They'll probably drop 40 on their division rival, and I don't think the Titans offense stands a chance. So not going to bench Daniel Jones. Even if Jonathan Taylor vultures him with 3 touchdowns, Jones can still throw for another 3 on top of that. No chance I'm benching Daniel Jones. And then no chance I'm benching Baker Mayfield, but obviously with Mike Evans going down, you can't really trust his weapons too much. But Chris Godwin hasn't really been contributing at all, and then Evans has missed a full month now. So I still trust Baker. He can play at an MVP level any week. And in division, this rivalry sometimes gets tough, but because Egbuka's not 100% healthy. That's why I'm putting him at the bottom of this tier. Baker is just a little bit capped in terms of like elite potential. If you told me he has a great game and still only has like 20 fantasy points, it wouldn't shock me. He doesn't have a full bevy of weapons, but keep an eye on Jalen McMillan. If he comes back off IR in the next few weeks, McMillan could be a league winner in fantasy. Next up, though, these next three I think are benefiting from some solid matchups, but the reason I trust Jaxson Dart so much is because he runs like crazy. Jaxson Dart probably gives you 50 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. So he could be the next Jalen Hurts for fantasy purposes. Literally, I don't think that's insane to propose, but I am worried that inevitably he gets hurt and suffers a major concussion or just like serious injury. He could be as injury prone as Joe Burrow if he does not learn to slide. So a little worried, but against the Eagles, on paper, it's not a brutal matchup, so not going to panic. It ranks top 14, neutral, somewhat positive. Let's stick with Dart. I think he's earned must-start status at this point. His upside is elite. He played very well against Denver, and against Philly, he also crushed them 2 weeks ago. So let's stick with Jaxson Dart in the top 10. And then because I think Sunday Night Primetime is such a shootout, I will stick with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. I was a bit too low on Rodgers last week against Cincinnati. And although the Packers defense looks like it could be a juggernaut, could be a terrible matchup, they've kind of underperformed. Even Jacoby Brissett didn't look too bad against them last week. So I think Rodgers with extra prep time, extra rest off the mini bye, I think he'll step up. He had 4 touchdowns last week. He also had 4 touchdowns against the Jets in another revenge game. And with some terrible matchups elsewhere and 6 teams on bye, I think Rodgers is a good quarterback to start. But Jordan Love, his protege, I think will really enjoy the moment as well and try to play up to Rodgers' elite performance. I think we're getting a really good quarterback back and forth this week between Rodgers and Jordan Love. So I kind of want to rank them higher. If you told me they outperformed Daniel Jones and Baker Mayfield this week, I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't think they're going to be better than what Justin Herbert put up. So I do think they're in a tier below. They also have limited upside in general. And if you also told me that Josh Jacobs vultures Love like another 2 times, that also wouldn't be a shocker. So there is some capped upside, but I genuinely think that Packers-Steelers game has a lot of offense and both quarterbacks play well. I think they're both legit starts in a 12-team league. I am telling you to put them in the lineup. On the lower end for sure, but I do see some upside. I think similar to Jaxson Dart, you could get a 25-point game out of Rodgers and Love. Should be a good back and forth between both of them. In the next tier, I think these are the last 3 that I'm willing to start, and they've had some really good consistency this year, and they've had some elite upside as well, and I think they've earned must-start status because of the situation with 6 teams on bye. In the top 15, like these are the most trustworthy names I can look to. So Dak Prescott at Denver kind of scares me, but honestly, I think the Cowboys offense plays well. If you told me Dak has just as good of a game as Dart did last week, wouldn't shock me at all, and I got to keep him in the top 12. But the matchup is a very legit downgrade. It didn't stop Herbert, another bad matchup for him, but I worry more about Denver than Minnesota. So Dak, I think will be fine. I still rank Lamb and Pickens as must-starts this week, but if you told me they all shit the bed and Dak has to lean on Ferguson mostly, I wouldn't be shocked. It's a revenge game for Javonte as well, so he could also get vultured with some rushing touchdowns. But Dak has been so good, I'll keep him in the top 12. A legitimate downgrade, though. This will probably be one of my lowest rankings on Dak all year. At 13, I got Drake Maye versus Cleveland, who gets a bottom 3 matchup for quarterbacks. The average is less than 13 points against the Browns at QB. So I know Drake Maye could potentially be matchup proof. I'm not going to tell you to outright bench him, but I have him at 13 because I trust the stats, and it's telling me that Cleveland is a really tough spot. So I know he's technically an MVP candidate, but I'm willing to trust Myles Garrett and the Browns defense to step up. I think Drake Maye is a bit of a liability. So at 13, technically outside of the start consideration, but before the black line above this tier break, I still think he's the guy you'd probably keep in the lineup. If you aren't pivoting to Rodgers, Jaxson Dart, or Jordan Love, then I doubt you're getting anyone off the wire and putting him in instead of Drake Maye. But I would go Rodgers this week over Drake Maye. That I would do personally. And then lastly, I'm a bit worried about Caleb Williams, but on paper, he gets a really good matchup. It ranks top 7, so I should be ranking Caleb much higher. But honestly, he's been a bit brutal lately. His last few games since the bye, they pivoted to the run game much more heavily. And I think DJ Moore is just no longer contributing to the offense. So, well, Caleb has 1 week with 30 plus points, another couple games with over 20. He's also had really non-existent floors. Just look at last week with no touchdown and less than 6 fantasy points. Not exciting at all. So if he does not give you a rushing touchdown, that's not good. Over the last month, his rushing stats have completely cratered. In week 1, he had 58 rushing yards and a touchdown. And then over the last 4 weeks, he has a total of 21. So an average of 5 rushing yards per game doesn't help you at all. That's why I'm worried Caleb could be a big problem, and DJ Moore has completely evaporated. So it's all kind of on the back of Rome Odunze, and they're leaning on the run game. Kyle Monangai does not help Caleb Williams' fantasy numbers at all. So even though it's an upgrade, that's the only reason I have Caleb above this tier break. I'm actually really worried to start him. But maybe you believe it's a shootout more than I do. I don't think he's earned your trust, though. He's fallen out of my good graces, and I think he's hyper matchup dependent. But I do think the Ravens defense does step up. Roquan Smith gets healthy. And if you told me that Marlon Humphrey and Kyle Hamilton would be this bad entering the year, I would tell you that's pretty crazy. So I think at some point they will wake up. It is probably this week. Their season's on the line. So I could see the Chicago Bears actually really look bad on offense. But I trust the run game. I don't really trust the passing game this week. Chicago's right there in like, are they a good team? Are they not? It's all hinging on Caleb's performance. I think he'll be fine because the matchup's not bad, but I don't think he's great. I don't think he's worth it. I'd rather go Dak in a much more difficult matchup, and same with Drake Maye. But moving forward, only would I start these guys in a super flex format or a hyper deep league. Like, unless you're in a 6-team team format, then what the fuck are you doing starting these options? But maybe you're in a competitive format and the waiver wire is so depleted. Maybe you're stuck with these options. That's just how it is. At 15, we got Michael Penix versus Miami. I told you on paper it's a bad matchup, but if you look at the season, the Dolphins are actually the second best matchup on the year. So I think Penix plays well. I think Drake London looks phenomenal. And because Bijan catches a lot of passes, I think the stats will be padded. It's all going to come down to Pitts and Mooney stepping up, but if they don't, Penix will be pretty shitty this week, so I can't put him above the tier break. Just a super flex 2 QB option. But at 15, if you're streaming the position, I suppose he is my favorite you could find other than Rodgers. At 16, I did tell you Carson Wentz would have a decent game on Thursday night, and he did have 1 touchdown, but yikes, he was brutal. The Chargers defense finally played well, and I think he was just so injured that it really held him back. He was grimacing, really in pain, and I don't know what the fuck they were doing benching JJ McCarthy. I think they were afraid that Jesse Minter's defense would have all of McCarthy's weaknesses on tap, and that was just the worst spot imaginable to wreck JJ's confidence. I think they put Wentz and threw him under the bus just to save McCarthy's confidence. Sad situation, but Wentz was pretty dog shit. At 17, I have Tyrod Taylor at Cincinnati, and I kind of want to rank him higher. I think Tyrod actually has major upside. The Bengals are a top 3 matchup, but it's not the upside of Justin Fields. He's not a lock in the top 10 in a good spot. I still have some reluctance to fully believe in him because Garrett Wilson isn't going to play. So I did pick the Jets to win, but I feel like that's much more risky than I did on Monday. And to tell me that Tyrod Taylor actually puts up good numbers feels like a really risky bet. So in the top 20, you could do worse, but in Superflex, that's really the only scenario I'd consider it. But the matchup is top 3. Maybe you're more confident than I am. At 18, I have Joe Flacco in the same game, and I'm kind of crazy. Call me whatever you want. Make fun of me if you wish, but I do think the Jets have a legit defense right now, and I'm actually worried about Flacco. But on paper, it's a top 15 matchup. I shouldn't be. He played very well against the Steelers, and then he gets extra time to prepare. However, I just don't believe it. I think Flacco's going to let you down at some point, and I just don't think he'll be as consistent. Now that there's some tape on him, there's a little bit easier paths to stop him. So I worry that the Jets defense is actually somewhat good. We thought they had a good roster on that side of the ball entering the year, and they just looked like shit for a while. We've dismissed them. But last 2 games, some somewhat legit opponents, they held the Broncos to 13 points, and then they also held Carolina to 13, while Rico Dowdle had been torching everyone. So I'm kind of worried. I could see the Bengals not drop 20 plus points, and it's all going to hinge on Flacco throwing touchdowns. But Chase Brown is pretty ass these days, so I would expect any points they do score to be passing touchdowns or field goals. And as long as McPherson isn't kicking 5 of them this week, then I think Flacco will have at least 2 touchdown passes, 1 to Chamar and 1 to T. Higgins. So I think he's fine, but I prefer the matchup for Tyrod Taylor. I also prefer it for Penix. And then I was a bit overconfident in Carson Wentz and the Vikings offense. So at 18 is where Flacco sits. I did rank him top 20 last week, but to tell me you know for a fact Flacco's going off, I think you might be drinking the Kool-Aid a little too much. So at 18, I'm pumping the brakes, but if you told me he was better than Caleb or even Dak this week, wouldn't be shocked. I could rank him side by side with Rodgers, and it may pan out like it did last week. But I'm not a full believer. Last week I trusted Flacco. This week I am hesitant to endorse him. At 19, though, I think this is the last tier where you could even consider someone in Superflex, but in my opinion, you want to be benching everyone. The Chiefs matchup is terrible, and if not for the rushing stats for Mariota, I'd be ranking him bottom 4 for sure. So I'm only trusting that. The matchup's bottom 6. No thank you on Mariota. He does get Terry and Debo back, but the Chiefs defense is looking elite. I'm going to fade Mariota at Kansas City. Not a good spot, in my opinion. At 20, we have Mac Jones at Houston, and I want to rank him higher, but I showed you on the chart the Texans allow less than 9 points per game on the season, and then the last 4, it's down to 5 points per game. So Sam Darnold had a lot of turnovers last week. I don't trust Mac Jones more than I trust Sam Darnold, but I do trust Kyle Shanahan a little bit more than Clint Kubiak. So perhaps Mac Jones does step up, but against DeMeco Ryans, a former Niners defensive coordinator, I think they'll know some of the secrets, and I could see Mac Jones totally shit the bed. So I actually want to rank Mac Jones at the bottom because Houston's just so difficult. But at the end of the day, I believe that on National Tight Ends Day, George Kittle is going to go off. So I wouldn't be shocked if there's 3 touchdowns that go to Kittle. I don't think they're going anywhere else in the passing game. It's either CMC or Kittle this week, and it's probably all George Kittle. But 3 touchdowns is a bit optimistic. It's probably going to cap itself at 2, and that's really the only saving grace for the argument to start Mac Jones. Purdy is out. Mac Jones has been okay, but I just don't trust this Texans matchup. I would be fading Mac Jones pretty hard. At 21, I got CJ Stroud in the same matchup. I think it's a close game, and I could see Stroud actually outperform Mac Jones. But without Nico Collins, I don't trust the rookie receivers too much, and even Dalton Schultz is heavily banged up. Stroud is a major liability. His upside is usually pretty capped, very touchdown dependent, and I don't think he throws for more than 2. Even that feels a bit optimistic. So no thanks with Stroud outside the top 20. No fucking chance. And then last one, you got to be super desperate. If you're scouring the waiver wire, maybe you'll settle on Spencer Rattler versus the Bucks. But Olave and Shaheed get a decent matchup on paper. He has looked okay, and then last week he did throw some touchdowns. But I'm worried it's a Taysom Hill bonanza that's about to happen. At some point, Taysom's going to go off. And he's already vultured Rattler once already in the last 3 weeks. So not dying to trust him. You got to be super desperate. And then these last 4, I think you're asking to lose. Dylan Gabriel at the Patriots, fuck no. Andy Dalton versus Buffalo. I think the Bills will step up. It's a bottom 4 matchup on paper, so no fucking chance. And then Cam Ward at the Colts. It is a good matchup, top 5, but I don't trust Cam Ward, especially that Ridley. No fucking upside. And then Tua at Atlanta. Tua probably gets benched in the next few weeks. I don't trust Tua to save my life. So those are my quarterback rankings. Now let's move on to the tight end position. And this week, if you have a big question at flex, if you have a lot of players on bye and you're not sure who to put in, I would give the tiebreaker to the tight end position. It's National Tight Ends Day. George Kittle pioneered this holiday, and it's usually celebrated. Literally, if you ask Google, their AI will give you this answer. It is celebrated typically by tight ends scoring touchdowns. So I think there will be at least a touchdown for a tight end in every game this week, and there are definitely touchdowns I think you should be chasing at that position a bit more elsewhere. The matchups are tough at receiver, running back is pretty shallow, tight end gets a big bump in week 8 on National Tight Ends Day. So we already saw Oronde Gadsden score a big touchdown on Thursday. Perhaps that bleeded over. Let's look at the matchups and show you where there might be some good touchdown opportunities. This chart shows you the last 4 games, how many points per game every defense is allowing to the tight end position. It's ordered for most to least in blue. But in red, I don't really care about the season-long stats for the sake of this video. I care more about how many touchdowns they've allowed. So the red statistic is how many touchdowns on the year that defense has given up. And there is a clear best fucking spot. Overall, it's not even close. We have the Cincinnati Bengals at number 1. On the year, Cincinnati has given up 9 touchdowns to the position. So I am 100% trusting this matchup. Last time we saw them, Rodgers had 4 touchdowns that all went to tight ends. And perhaps it does skew the numbers a bit, but even if you take those out, they would still rank tied for first with 5 touchdowns on the year. So I think Mason Taylor is going to have potentially the game of his life. I think Tyrod Taylor will be the starter, and with no Garrett Wilson, they will exploit this defense as best they can. We've seen games where Mason Taylor has had double-digit targets already, and he has 2 with 60-plus yards. I think he finds the end zone. I think Mason Taylor gets a major upgrade as long as he's healthy. There's a chance he doesn't play. He's questionable, but according to Aaron Glenn, it sounds likely he will suit up. So Mason Taylor is my favorite streamer this week by far. It's not even close. And then the number 2 matchup is 7 points lower, but it is a pretty good spot here against the Packers. So Rodgers, I think, might have another big tight end touchdown day. I'm not going to trust Darnell Washington or Casey Hayward, but Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth are legit weapons in the passing game. I think they will play well against Green Bay. They have allowed 5 touchdowns on the year, and I think one of Jonnu and Freiermuth, if not both, find the end zone for the second week in a row. I think there is a touchdown going to Jonnu or Freiermuth. Sadly, it might not go to both, and if they weren't competing with each other, it'd be a little more obvious, but I do see a big upgrade against Green Bay for Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth. Last week, Trey McBride scored 2 touchdowns as well. Number 3 on this list would be Indianapolis, who have not given up as many touchdowns, only 3 on the year, but that is still relatively above average. That's basically baseline 3 touchdowns, kind of the minimum to consider a good bet. And this week they get Chigokonkwo, who is technically one of the safest receiving targets in this offense with no Calvin Ridley. So I do think Okonkwo is an interesting streamer for sure. There could be some garbage time, especially for him. But last week the Titans started off well and then flatlined. It could easily happen again. If he doesn't score early, he may do jack fucking shit as the game goes on. But a player you are starting no matter what, a lock in the lineup, gets a top 4 matchup, and I think is a guarantee to find the end zone, would be Tucker Kraft, who goes up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers have given up second most in the league, 5 tight end touchdowns this season. So Tucker Kraft, always a must start, playing lights out lately. A touchdown last week, a touchdown this week. I trust Tucker Kraft. The Steelers allow just shy of 16 points per game to the position over the last month. These next 2 matchups are both on bye, so Jacksonville and Arizona, giving up over 15 points per game, don't matter this week. 3 touchdowns wasn't the best spot possible, but still positive overall. So 2 good matchups are taken away, but then against Tampa Bay, I could see some upside for Juwan Johnson and technically Taysom Hill. If you still consider him a full-blown tight end, then Taysom Hill does get an upgrade as well against Tampa Bay. They're giving up the 7th most fantasy points, over 14 points per game, and they've also had 4 receiving touchdowns this year. So if a touchdown goes to Juwan Johnson this week, I'm not going to be shocked. However, it could be the breakout game I'm anticipating for Taysom that you know is inevitable. There's going to be one game where Taysom drops like 30 points, and then he'll be the number 1 waiver claim and have a few other double-digit performances, but in general kind of let you down. I think this could be the week where Taysom pops off. But last major upgrade, more than 13 points per game allowed, would be Carolina, who have also given up 4 touchdowns to the position. So I do think Dalton Kincaid, assuming he plays, is a very safe start. We didn't see him on the field 2 weeks ago, but he's been limited all week in practice, and I assume he'll be cleared for Sunday. So Kincaid, I think, has an amazing game on Sunday. Really good matchup against Carolina, and they've ranked actually top 3 on the year in terms of matchups. So very consistent numbers. 4 touchdowns in 7 games played. I expect a TD for Kincaid on National Tight Ends Day. Next up, I think we're dropping down a tier in terms of upgrades, but I still kind of like all these matchups. They give up at least 12 points per game. All of them do, and they have some decent upgrades for legitimate tight ends you would consider starting. So at number 9, maybe you're not willing to trust Noah Fant, but it's kind of a limited target share in Cincinnati, and Fant has a connection to Flacco dating back to Denver. So last week he scored a touchdown. The Jets have given up 4 on the year. It's possible Fant gets back in the end zone. It is an upgrade, a good matchup against the Jets, but I'm probably not trusting him. Last week felt a little bit hard to believe in. And then at number 10 does rank New England. So the Patriots get Harold Fannin and David Njoku. It looks like Njoku is probably going to play. He's been limited in practice this week, and that'll probably be an annoying factor for Harold Fannin. So I would have told you they're a must start, but now I'm not so sure. If not for a touchdown that can save you, I might not totally trust Fannin and Njoku, but it is a top 10 matchup. Maybe you have more faith than I do. At 11, we have the Vikings, who did let Gadsden pop off again. So Gadsden had a great game. Another reason to maybe believe in these upgrade matchup stats. And then at 12, we do have Chicago next on the list. So Mark Andrews should play well, but at some point, I do think Isaiah Likely will get back in the mix. He's been irrelevant so far, and off the bye, they might try to get him involved. He was injured to start the year, so maybe that's the missing piece, Isaiah Likely in this offense, but given Andrews has been the guy overwhelmingly, I'll still trust Mark Andrews in the top 10. At New Orleans, I think Cade Otton gets a big upgrade. They've given up 4 touchdowns this year, so I do think Otton is a very safe play with no Evans or Godwin. The volume should be locked in, and I trust Baker to score touchdowns, so Otton probably finds the end zone. And then the last one that is significantly an upgrade would be Tennessee, who have given up 4 touchdowns as well. But everyone was already starting Tyler Warren, no question about it. Tyler Warren is a stud. These next 8 matchups, though, I think are all in the neutral zone. None of these, I think, are upgrades nor downgrades, all between 12 and 9.5 fantasy points allowed. So next on the slate here would be Dallas, who go up against Evan Engram. Not many touchdowns this year, only 2. So Engram is kind of a liability. They have a strange offense. He gets targets, he moves the chains, but Engram isn't always a go-to option in the red zone. So not expecting a touchdown, but on National Tight Ends Day, perhaps it does happen. And then in the same game, Denver has only given up 3 touchdowns this year. So Jake Ferguson probably plays well given the bad matchups for the receivers in this spot. I still trust Ferguson. Last week he had 2 touchdowns. Even with Lamb back, he's a must start in my view. At 17 on the list, we have the Washington Commanders. So Travis Kelce gets a neutral matchup, but they have given up 4 touchdowns on the year. Perhaps Kelce is a pretty safe bet on Monday night. Next on the list would be the Chargers, who gave up 4 touchdowns as well, but TJ Hawkinson didn't do shit against them. So Carson Wentz was mainly the problem. Hawkinson wasn't very good. And then the Dolphins are also neutral. Kyle Pitts could have a fine game, but probably not much better than what you expect. In general, you don't trust Kyle Pitts very much. But next on the list would be Dalton Schultz, who had a great game last week with no Nico Collins. I think he's probably a very safe volume play, but hard to trust a touchdown in the Texans offense. And then Hunter Henry gets a slightly below average matchup against Cleveland. Not the best bet. I hope he doesn't get vultured by Austin Hooper. Next on the list, though, would be Colston Loveland going against Baltimore. This matchup is the last one I consider overall neutral at 9.6 points. Loveland could step up. Cole Kmet is injured, but we haven't seen anything from him. It would be kind of a surprise if Loveland does wake up. So that's the last one I'm not too worried about, but general circumstances, not dying to trust Loveland too much. And then of the next 5, they're all kind of downgrades, but 4 of them are on bye. So Seattle and Las Vegas at 9.5 points. Those matchups are irrelevant. And then the Rams at 8.7, the Lions at 8.1 are also on bye as well. All irrelevant matchups this week. But right in the middle of those four, we do have the Giants this week, who do get Dallas Goedert, who torched them 2 weeks ago. With A.J. Brown already ruled out, I would expect Dallas Goedert to have a great game once again. So Goedert, I think, is a very safe option. However, the matchup stats are not good. They didn't matter at all, though, 2 weeks ago. And then these last five are really the only ones I consider like major downgrades, especially given 4 of the previous 5 were on bye. But these last 5, at least one of them, I'm fucking dismissing entirely. On paper, Houston is a terrible spot. They've only given up 1 touchdown this year, but they get George Kittle on National Tight Ends Day. These stats will change, and watch the touchdown numbers literally triple. I think at least 2 touchdowns for Kittle this week will happen. I could be dead wrong. He had a bagel last week, but I think he bounces back on the holiday that he started. So Kittle, I think, is matchup proof. I'm still going to start him, and I'll be honest, I'm ranking him number 1. I don't give a shit that the Texans are a downgrade. And then these next 4, maybe I care a little bit more about. But the Philly Eagles did shut down Theo Johnson and Daniel Bellinger 2 weeks ago, so that could definitely happen. They won comfortably, and Theo and Bellinger didn't do shit. So on paper, the Eagles are a very bad matchup, only 1 touchdown this year, so not dying to press my luck on that. However, the Chiefs rank bottom 3. The Chiefs have also only given up 1 touchdown, so Zach Ertz with Terry and Debo coming back and Mariota under center. Not trusting Zach Ertz at all this week. And then these last 2 giving up less than 5 points. We have Atlanta against the Dolphins, but Darren Waller was placed on IR. So Tanner Conner, no one gives a fuck about him. Not going to start Tanner Conner. And then lastly, Jatavion Sanders. No one really rosters him. He has some value, but in this bad matchup, I'm definitely not picking him up. Not going to trust Jatavion with Andy Dalton. Have no idea what the chemistry is between those two, and it is the worst matchup you can find at tight end. So that is it for the matchup stats. Now let's talk about my rankings at the position. And overall, I think I'm kind of just trusting my gut for the most part. There are some no-brainers. And at number 1, I'm buying into National Tight Ends Day. If there's one tight end I'm going to bet on to score a touchdown on Sunday, it would be George Kittle. So I don't think he just scores 1. I think he scores 2. And I know he put up a bagel last week, but he has literally the highest ceiling of any tight end possible. If you told me he put up 30 points, I wouldn't be surprised. He genuinely has that ceiling capable. He's had 3 touchdown games in the past, and I think he'll have at least 1. I think 2 is a legitimate bet for Kittle on National Tight Ends Day. So he's in an elite tier all to himself. Last week was weird. I think it's his fluke bagel of the year, and I'm going to trust him to bounce back in a major way. There's no way he's putting up another bagel on this holiday. So got to start Kittle. He's a no-brainer. And then at number 2, I'm going to trust Tucker Kraft no matter what. Kraft's been lights out this year, no issues at all. And then he scored a touchdown last week. The Steelers ranked top 4. Every green light you could ask for is here for Tucker Kraft. So I'm going to trust him. I think he plays exceptional, guaranteeing a touchdown for Kraft against Pittsburgh. Next up, number 3 would be Tyler Warren versus Tennessee. A good matchup for him. The Titans have allowed 4 touchdowns this season, so I expect another one to go to Warren this week. I don't see a reason to be benching Tyler Warren. He's been balls to the wall, lights out as a rookie. Everything you could have asked for and more. Excellent draft pick by the Colts in round 1. At number 4, Dallas Goedert fucking torched the Giants 2 weeks ago, so I'll bet on that to repeat. I'm not going to fade Goedert, especially with A.J. Brown out. I don't think Jahan Dotson factors in too much. Goedert probably gets another 12 targets in this game. I see elite volume, but perhaps the Giants find a way to limit him. It's improbable that he has the exact same stat line or better than he did 2 weeks ago. It was just so good, one of the best tight end games we've seen all year. Other than the Gadsden explosion, hard to find a better game from a tight end than Goedert 2 weeks ago. So maybe they limit him. Maybe he falls down a little bit, but I expect a touchdown, no doubt about it, from Dallas Goedert. At number 5, Jake Ferguson had 2 last week, and the Broncos have elite corners, so they'll probably be locking up Pickens and Lamb a little bit. I expect Dak to lean on the tight end yet again. So Ferguson's a must start. No chance you're benching him after last week's game. But technically the Broncos aren't the best possible matchup. They rank middle of the pack right at 16. You could do better, you could do worse. I think it's going to be fine though for Jake Ferguson. At number 6, I think we are dropping down a tier, and there is a little bit more risk, but mainly the floor is so safe with the top 5. That's why it's not the same equation. But I do think Mark Andrews is a very safe top 10 play this week. Andrews does get a top 12 matchup. Chicago has only given up 2 touchdowns this year, but you know that Lamar and the Ravens will play well in a must-win. Their season's on the line. So I'm going to trust Mark Andrews. I think he plays very well this week. And then Dalton Kincaid, as long as he suits up, gets a big upgrade here. Top 8 matchup against Carolina, and I do think he plays phenomenally well. He's been a really consistent option for Josh Allen this year, the number 1 target in Buffalo when healthy. And although he didn't play 2 weeks ago off the bye, I think he'll be fine. He's been limited all week in practice, and I am assuming Kincaid will play. So if he does, I think the floor is great. I think he will score a touchdown as well. And this matchup for him against Carolina have given up 4 touchdowns on the season. So like Kincaid, the upside I think is very high, and on National Tight Ends Day he should play, should score a touchdown, should be a great top 10 option for you this week. A very good flex option if you have the depth to put him in behind someone like Kittle or Tyler Warren. At number 8, I think we're still in like must-start territory with no Evans or Godwin. Why would you be benching Cade Otton? A very safe option, a very good matchup for him as well. Ranks top 13. And just like Carolina for Kincaid, the Saints have allowed 4 touchdowns to the position. So I think Otton will find the end zone. I think Baker is a safe quarterback to trust. And last week, the volume is pretty high for him. I don't see it going away. Otton will get at least 8 targets, in my opinion. It's a very safe tight end to start. Top 10 for sure. Number 9, I think we are dropping down a little bit, but I would still be starting these guys. But there is just like one minor hesitation. With Kelce, now that Rashee Rice is back, there's fewer touchdowns available, so that does cap his upside a little bit, but he's not going anywhere. He's played pretty well this season, and although he is 36 years old now, he does not look as washed as I would have expected. So he's still top 10 this year, still a reliable tight end. He's not the same guy as like 3 years ago, but he is still a reliable start in fantasy. So not going to bench him in prime time. He probably scores a touchdown and we see Swift on the big screen. He'll probably have that dumb bull riding celebration again. Something stupid. You know, he's weird. So Kelce, still going to start him, but don't like him personally. And then at 10, we have Oronde Gadsden, who I wasn't a full believer in, but I did have him in the streaming conversation. So I am definitely going to bump him up even higher. If you picked him up off the waiver wire, he looks like a league winner right now. And perhaps he doesn't last too long, but he is definitely above Quentin Johnston. And that's saying a lot. So Gadsden, I'm very happy to have him as a Charger fan myself, but a bit of a surprise. Last 2 weeks have been rather shocking, but the rookie looks elite. At 11, I think Dalton Schultz will have very good volume, just like Cade Otton this week, a very safe floor play. However, he got really banged up last week. He looked kind of injured, and he did have 10 targets in a good matchup. The Niners matchup is not as easy, so I could see them limit him and double team him. He's kind of the only reliable weapon they have in the passing game with Nico unavailable, and I could see Schultz not offer you a touchdown. He's not been a safe bet for that at all this year. So the Niners, I think, will keep him out of the end zone. I could see his upside a bit capped, but given Nico has been ruled out, the floor is very safe. The volume is there to trust. At 12, though, I think we're in the streaming conversation for sure, and there's always some risk. Half of these players are still on the waiver wire in most settings. So I understand if you don't want to actually move to pick up Mason Taylor, but the Bengals matchup is just so good. As long as Taylor plays, I think he's the best start off the wire this week. Last week, I had a very good call ranking Dalton Schultz as my go-to streaming option off the wire, and this week I'm leaning into the matchup stats. I am telling you it is Mason Taylor, no doubt about it. The reason I rank Schultz higher is because Nico is inactive, but if not, I would have Mason Taylor at 11. So Mason Taylor, a very, very high upside swing. With no Garrett Wilson, I think the volume's also a lock. Tyrod Taylor should exploit the weakness of the Bengals defense. It is clearly the tight end position. They've given up 9 tight end touchdowns on the year. The second most of any team would be just 5, almost double the second best matchup in that regard. Mason Taylor should find the end zone, should have a great game. I think he'll get 10 plus targets if he's active. At 13, I have Harold Fannin Jr. at New England, and I was going to rank him top 10 earlier in the week, but that was when I thought David Njoku wouldn't be healthy. So Fannin does get a good matchup here, top 10 against the Patriots, but they've only allowed 2 touchdowns. It's mainly a yardage proposition against the Patriots for tight ends. But on the holiday, maybe he does find the end zone. But with Njoku probably coming back, now it's pretty hard to trust. So I don't think he gets the biggest upgrade you could imagine. He's probably a safe floor play because he's been really reliable this year, pretty involved. Last week, I'm willing to throw out entirely because of the bad weather. But with Njoku coming back, the volume won't be as elite. And Fannin at 13, not my favorite pickup, but still a safe floor option. A good backup tight end for sure, but I'd rather go Mason Taylor in a much better matchup by far. So Taylor, still my favorite option, but Fannin, a good consolation prize. And then folks are still sleeping on Evan Engram versus the Cowboys. It's not an elite matchup, but it doesn't scare you at all. And Engram is a pretty reliable target for Bo Nix, but touchdowns are a bit rare for him. You can get 7 targets, 5 catches, and 45 yards, and kind of have like a 7-point floor with Engram most of the time. But if he does score a touchdown, you'll be very happy. He's a bust-proof option, and I think he's a great backup to have, but I kind of see the upside being capped. I don't think he's the top 10 guy I thought he would be back in August, back when we were drafting the position. So I think he's fine. He'll consistently rank top 15 or so, but I doubt I'm ever going to put him like top 10 with much conviction unless his matchup is elite. And this week, it's just average. It ranks 15th, not many touchdowns. The Cowboys have given up either, only 2 this year. Ingram's fine, but not my favorite upside swing. Just a floor play. Pretty bust-proof, though. Very safe option. That's for sure. If all you need is 7 from tight end, go Evan Engram. That's a safe bet. At 15, I have Hunter Henry, who's a little bit more boom-bust. There have been some weird games where he's kind of disappeared or Austin Hooper vultures him. And then there's also some other games where he's fucking fantastic and elite. But the matchup against Cleveland isn't the best you could find, so I'm not going to upgrade him significantly. He's also a good backup to have, but a little bit up and down, a little bit random to trust, a bit touchdown dependent. And if it wasn't the holiday, I wouldn't feel that confident in betting on it. But any upgrade you give for him to be more likely to score a touchdown, you can also apply to literally every other tight end as well. Given it's the holiday, across the board, all tight ends gain a bit of value. So against their peers, against the position, it's not like I'm going to bump up Hunter Henry into the top 10 just because he might score a touchdown, same as everybody else. Henry at 15 is a fine flex play, but probably just a low-end streamer at tight end. And then these next 2, I kind of want to rank way, way higher against Green Bay, but it's not as good of a matchup as the Bengals matchup was, so I doubt both of them find the end zone. But on Sunday night, I do think Rodgers plays pretty well, and I do see some legit upside. The Packers have given up 5 tight end touchdowns this year to the position. So I do think one of them scores, and given the usage down the field, I do think Freiermuth has slightly higher upside. The volume kind of favors Jonnu, but it's much more check down and like close to the line of scrimmage type of volume. So the targets are more valuable when they go to Freiermuth, but they are a little bit more rare to go in that direction. So it's all going to come down to a touchdown, which guy will get it. And in terms of upside, I think if you told me Freiermuth and Jonnu score based on yardage, I would think Freiermuth puts up more yards. So that's why I rank him above, but you could put either of them in your lineup and make a case for it. The matchup is just so good. I think they're fine bets to make if you're desperate. But given it's only the matchup, why you would trust it, it's not as good as Cincinnati. I'm just rather going to go towards Mason Taylor if I'm picking someone up off the waiver wire. Freiermuth and Jonnu are interesting, but not that safe. I'd rather just stick with Engram or Hunter Henry or Harold Fannin. At 18, I think we're dropping down a tier, and some of these players carry way more risk, but some of their matchups are fucking good, and it's kind of hard not to rank them higher. Njoku has a lot of talent. I trust him to get some looks, but coming off of an injury with Fannin emerging, not the safest play. I want to rank him higher, but because of Fannin there, I just can't do it. I'd like to know that he's fully healthy before I endorse him. Top 12. So no thanks on Njoku. If I can pass, I will. And then Okonkwo is super tempting because Ridley's still out. And the matchup's top 3 against the Colts. But are you really trusting a Cam Ward pass catcher? I don't trust the Titans offense enough. And it's probably going to be a blowout. I still don't trust Okonkwo. But maybe he gets like 7 or 8 targets and he proves me wrong. The floor, I think, is pretty safe on Okonkwo, but the ceiling pretty capped. It feels kind of sad to pick him up off the wire. I'd probably just leave him alone just because it's the Titans. At 20, though, Kyle Pitts could play okay. The Dolphins matchup isn't that bad. It's pretty neutral. I don't really want to trust Pitts, so in general, I'm just going to fade him. But TJ Hawkinson also didn't play well in an equally neutral matchup. So they were in the same tier, pretty uninspiring to start them, and I wasn't wrong on this rank on TJ Hawkinson. But then these last 5 are the only other guys I would consider, and at this point, if you're not going to take one of the other safer bets, then just swing for upside. Fuck the, middle of the pack options. Like if you're not getting Engram for 7 points, then swing for 20 with these guys. Taysom Hill, you know it's coming. At some point, Taysom will pop off, and then everyone's going to chase the points, and he'll burn you. So maybe you're willing to risk it. I'm probably just going to leave him alone, but I know at some point Taysom will be fucking good, and he does get a top 7 matchup against Tampa Bay on National Tight Ends Day. Why not have a good game from Taysom Hill? But I have Juwan Johnson in the same matchup right behind him. Juwan's been much safer, so a better floor for Juwan, higher upside with Taysom. And then with Cole Kmet out, there is some opportunity for Colston Loveland, who I have at 24, but not going to trust him. I haven't seen shit from Loveland yet, so it would be way too risky. But to pretend like the upside isn't there would be a lie. He was drafted above Tyler Warren, and they probably want that to look good at some point or other. So maybe Loveland does pop off with no Kmet finally, but until I see it, not going to rank him any higher than this. And then lastly, I'm still a believer that Isaiah Likely has league-winning value, but it's not something we can point to. There's no evidence of it yet, just like Loveland. It would be very, very unwise to endorse them without seeing it first. So gotta feel super risky, maybe on a prop bet or DFS roster, you'd consider them. But these last 4 feel way, way too risky to actually start. Maybe except Juwan Johnson, who has had some good weeks in the past. But lastly, let's talk about the defensive position. And in general, with 6 teams on bye, you may get stuck with just whoever's available on the wire. But I think there are some clear top 10 must starts. And at 1 and 2, these guys are the elite of the elite. The Dolphins matchup is so good. Tua's just absolute dog shit. And the Falcons defense has actually been really fucking good this year, really underrated. So they're my number 1. I don't see the Dolphins putting up more than 10 points at all. I also see at least 2 turnovers. One of them could easily be a pick 6. So the Falcons, I think, have the highest upside against Tua Tagovailoa. At 2, the Colts against the Titans should fucking dominate. Final score probably like 40-10. And Cam Ward, not going to know what hit him. In division, the Titans should fucking dominate. At 3, I think we're dropping down a tier, but I got the Pats versus Cleveland, who feel like a no-brainer. They would be in the tier above if not for Quinshon Judkins. I could see Quinshon actually have a really good game. Quinshon's really talented, so that's the only red flag in my opinion. It could be a trap game as well. I could see them kind of sleep on this opponent, but against Dylan Gabriel, definitely a must start with the Pats. At 4, I got the Buccaneers at New Orleans, and similar situation against Spencer Rattler. You always want to trust him. In division, this is always a heated rivalry, and if you told me the Saints failed to score 10 points this week, would not be shocked at all. I think they'll settle for a lot of field goals. Very few touchdowns. Rattler should turn it over at least twice. Give me the Bucks in the top 5. The Chiefs get Mariota, so in prime time, I think they play very well. I like the Chiefs a lot. Very safe play, but Terry and Debo come back. Perhaps they do step up a little bit, but I think on the ground, JCM will do nothing. The Chiefs' run defense is amazing, so not going to trust the Commanders at all here. Definitely start the Chiefs. And then at 6, I think the Texans looked so good against Seattle with 4 turnovers. I will start them even against Kyle Shanahan's offense. I think the Texans are a lock in the lineup. Definitely top 10 with 6 teams on bye. At number 7, I think we're dropping down a tier, but in the same game, I do have the Niners at Houston. And I don't trust the Niners personnel as much, but they really played well. Even losing Fred Warner, they still stepped up. Robert Saleh, one of the best defensive coordinators in the league this year. So I think they'll be fine. It's mainly the matchup, though. The Texans offense is pretty bad. And without Nico Collins, who the fuck do you trust to burn you? So I like the Niners. I think from a floor standpoint, they're very safe. And then the Bills at Carolina could put up a blowout victory, could really, really limit Carolina. But they do have Rico Dowdle. There is a minor red flag there. However, Andy Dalton getting the start, that's a pretty safe play. The Bills should be fine. Eagles probably come raging back, a big revenge game after the loss 2 weeks ago. So I think in the rematch, they will play well, but it's mainly because Jalen Carter and Quinyon Mitchell are healthy, why I would consider them in the top 10. I am actually afraid of Jaxson Dart and Cam Scatterboot making this ranking look like shit. I could be dead wrong like I was 2 weeks ago. So good luck there, but I'll trust them one more time. And then at 10, last defense, I'm starting with some confidence. You might not like this, but I'm giving you the Jets at number 10. Last 2 weeks against Denver and Carolina, neither team has scored more than 13 points on the scoreboard against them. So perhaps the passing game for Flacco just looks so good, but I see some turnovers here. I think they settle for field goals a lot, and I do think the Jets hold them to under 20 points. So I think they'll play well. They've been stepping up lately, and I think Aaron Glenn's coaching is finally showing up on defense. The offense is terrible, but I think the defense is actually okay. But I have ranked the receivers high this week. I kind of don't really know what to do with the Jets defense and the Bengals starters. On one hand, I think the Jets could really play well on defense, and then on another hand, I think they'll be dog shit. So do whatever you want, but in my opinion, the Jets will win the game, and they will finish top 10 in fantasy. At 11, I think these are the last four I would consider from a streaming standpoint. I got the Browns, Steelers, Packers, and Bengals. And the Browns have been so good on the year, even against Drake May. I think they're fine from a floor standpoint. They were great last week, but the weather played a factor. They'll be okay, not great, just fine. I think they'll give you about 6-7 points in fantasy this week. At 12 and 13, though, the Steelers-Packers game could be elite on offense. That is kind of what I'm expecting, but then they could also really play well on defense. It's kind of a middle-of-the-pack situation. I see some turnovers, though, and that will pad the numbers. Not many sacks, in my opinion, but turnovers will help in fantasy. At 14, I think the Jets matchup is always good, so the Bengals a bit more tempting, but their defense sucks, so this is the highest I can go. You got to be really desperate to start the Bengals. However, I did miss on the Chargers. They had a really good defensive game last week, but they have been really bad before that, and they are still really injured. So I didn't see it coming. I didn't think Carson Wentz was that banged up. I was wrong to bench the Chargers, but I was not wrong to bench the Vikings. I had them at 16 behind the line, and the Chargers offense was amazing. A negative point total for the Vikings in fantasy this week. I ranked them still too high at 16, but the Broncos, even against Dallas, they're still too good to fade. So this tier has talent at defense, but bad matchups. Broncos scare me because of Dak Prescott on the other side. At 17, I'll bench him. And then at 18, I'm optimistic that the Ravens turn it around, but against Chicago, the Bears have scored at least 21 in every game, and it probably turns into a shootout. I'll probably pass, but they probably wake up, given their season is on the line. These next four, no thanks to the Saints, Giants, Bears, and Cowboys. I have no desire to go up against the Bucs offense and Baker, the Eagles offense with Philly, the Ravens offense with Lamar, and then the Broncos offense behind Sean Payton and Bo Nix. None of their matchups are good. I will bench them for sure. And then the last four, I think you're asking to lose. These are the elite offenses opposite them, and then none of their defenses are that impressive. The Panthers are actually okay, but against Josh Allen off the bye, no fucking chance I'm starting them. And then against Mahomes right now, no chance I'm starting the Commanders. No chance I'm starting the Dolphins. Their defense is horse shit. Against Bijan, no fucking way. And then the Titans at the Colts, what are you, fucking crazy? You should be put in an insane asylum if you start the Titans defense. So those are all my rankings this week at every position, and here they are on the screen. I am not going to get too picky, given there are 6 teams on bye. So everyone above the black line, if you have, you can start, especially at quarterback. Even Dak in a bad matchup, Drake May in a bad matchup, and Caleb with some risk lately, I think are still fine starts, but definitely more in the streaming conversation if you're in a 10-team format. In a 12-team league, I'd still be starting Dak but Drake, Maye, and Caleb kind of scare me a little bit. Instead, I think obviously you're starting Lamar and Josh Allen, Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. I was right on Herbert. Nick's in a great matchup. Also must start. Daniel Jones has been great, top 10 this year. And same with Baker. Those guys are all must starts in the top 8. But 9, 10, and 11, I'm planting my flag on Jaxson Dart with the rushing value to still be really good, even with Carter coming back for the Eagles defense. And then that Sunday night game between Rodgers and Love, I think is a shootout. I think a pretty good game between the two of them. Maybe some turnovers, but Rodgers and Love, I think, are top 11 quarterbacks this week. I would start them if I can. But Dak, Maye, and Caleb, the last I would consider. And then in a Superflex format, give me Penix, Wentz, Tyrod Taylor, and Joe Flacco with some upside, but I was wrong on Carson Wentz. And then Mariota, Mac Jones, CJ Stroud, and Rattler have some rough matchups, not safe plays. Really desperate with them, and then no fucking chance I'll start Gabriel, Dalton, Ward, or Tua, who are outside the top 22. But then at tight end, I'm planting my flag on Kittle on National Tight Ends Day. I think he has at least 2 touchdowns, if not 3. And then no fucking chance you're benching Kraft, Warren, Goedert, and Ferguson this week. Can't think of a reason to do that. Andrews has a good matchup, so does Kincaid and Otton. The volume should be there for them. I like the touchdown upside as well, but not as safe as the top 5. And then Kelce usually plays well, but not as safe with Rashi coming back. A little bit tricky there, but should find the end zone. Gadsden was amazing. Now I fully believe in him. He'll be ranked even higher next week. Schultz, with no Nico, the volume will be elite again, so another 10 targets probably. And then my favorite streamer is Mason Taylor, but I still like Fannin in a top 10 matchup. Engram has a very safe, bust-proof floor. Henry can always pop off, but a bit touchdown dependent. Freiermuth and Jonnu get a great matchup, but eat into each other. Those are my preferred streamers, 12 through 17. But 18 through 21 are still kind of interesting. Njoku, Okonkwo, Pitts, and Hawkinson. Njoku's talented, but crowded with Fannin. Okonkwo gets a great matchup. Pitts, an average matchup. And then Hawkinson, not that exciting. I was right to bench him. But if you're swinging for the fence, go Taysom Hill. He's my favorite of the rando flyers that you're just a madman to trust. But then at defense, rough pickings this week, given 6 teams are on bye. I like the Falcons and Colts as locks in the lineup. Amazing matchups there. Pats versus Cleveland, Bucks at Saints, Chiefs versus Washington, and then the Texans versus the Niners. Either the matchup or their production this year has been so good, I would trust them, no doubt about it. Niners at Houston, don't trust the Texans offense. Bills at Carolina, off the bye, I think they wake up. Eagles versus the Giants are seeking revenge. And then the Jets at Cincinnati, I just have a gut call that the Jets continue to keep playing well on defense. Less than 13 points the last 2 weeks from both opponents. And then lastly, the ones I'd consider would be the Browns, Steelers, Packers, and Bengals with some level of floor in mind. I was wrong on the Chargers, but everyone below them I would be benching. Vikings, Broncos, Ravens, Saints, Giants, Bears, and Cowboys. No thanks with them. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I will see you next time. Tomorrow I'll be updating all the ranks with injury news across the league. Stay tuned for that. Ring the notification bell if you don't want to miss out. My name's Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.